You guys really love these August ghost stories. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights. Let's go again.
My paranormal experience that was collaborated by a stranger. Hi all, new to the sub. Have this crazy story that I've never told, but feel you would appreciate hearing. I will try to keep it from being too long, but brevity isn't a strong point. It was the summer of 2005, but this experience is burned into my memory as if it happened last month. I was in college, staying for the summer at school, at an off-campus house rented by 4 of my fraternity brothers. As such, it was a boisterous house, lots of people coming and going, frequent parties, often loud music, all those sorts of things from young college-aged kids. This house was built in 1930, nothing remarkable, located in a small Virginia town with a lot of history. This was a Sunday night, and it was different than usual. All my roommates were out of town. I was alone for the evening. It wasn't the first time to be alone, but it was certainly rare for only one person to be in the house. Oftentimes, friends would crash on couches, and there would be more than the 4 people who lived there bounding about. I did not have anything to drink, watch some TV, then turn into bed around midnight. I usually sleep well, have never suffered any sort of sleep paralysis, or even any frightening nightmares, but on this night, I couldn't fall asleep. I felt like I was being watched. I got up, confirmed all doors were locked and lights were off, and laid back down. As soon as I got back into bed, I saw it, and froze in fear. What I saw was difficult to describe, but impossible to forget. It was a black shadow, in the silhouette of a person, but that was it. I could tell it was much darker, and left an outline to the wall behind it. When I saw it, a chill went up my spine. I couldn't see many features, but could instantly tell it was looking at me. I'm laying on my back, just frozen in fear. I could physically move, but I was so scared. I just laid as still as possible. Was I just freaking myself out? I don't think I was. The firehouse was down the road, and the ambulances and fire trucks frequently drove on the street outside the window of the room I lived in, on the first floor. I heard the sirens and remained still. The red flashing lights, as the truck drove by briefly, illuminated the room. The outline of the shadow was 100% there. There was no doubt in my mind. Some sort of dark shadow was in the room at the foot of my bed, looking at me, though I couldn't see any eyes, and I had no doubt it wasn't a living human being. Then it started moving. Not really walking, but as if on a people mover, just sliding slowly but steadily. When I first saw it, it was to my right, just beyond my foot. It was moving down my left. It got to the end of the bed and turned to me, seeming to rotate so its dark head was ever focused and locked on me. Just typing this now gives me chills and goosebumps all these years later. Once it turned, it slowly made its way to the bed, closer to me. I was frozen with fear, praying it would go away. I considered screaming. I considered running out the room. I thought about rolling over and pulling the sheets over my head and just pretending I was somehow tricking myself into imagining. But I couldn't, because I knew I wasn't tricking myself at all. Finally, as it got almost up to me, it seemingly started leaning down right into my face, the black silhouette very distinct. I just squeezed my eyes tight and refused to open them. I stayed that way, petrified and awake, but with my eyes closed for what felt like hours. I once slowly opened them, and couldn't tell if the figure was still close to me, or not. But I was so freaked out, I didn't know what was going on. Finally, at first light, pretty early at that time of the year, I got up and ran out of the house, stopping only to grab a shirt and sandals and basically sprinting out. I didn't come back until later, when a couple of roommates were back. I repeated to them basically everything I said above, and they thought I was either crazy or tricking myself. Since it was August and summer was almost over, I slept on a couch in the living room for the short time left. I already had plans to move out for the school year to a different apartment, and was so scared that I did not want to stay in that room ever again. Life sort of settled down. Business went on as usual until the following Saturday afternoon, 6 days after my experience. A group of my friends were relaxing, watching TV when 4 to 5 members of the family, all wearing matching reunion t-shirts, knocked on the door. This house had been in their family a long time ago, and they wondered if we would let them in so that they could walk through it and remember the past. Weird but sure, they were older, each one no younger than 50, with a couple in their 60s and 70s, and seemed nice, so we let them in. We pretty much just went back to watching TV while they wandered around the house. My room was attached to the living room, and once they walked through the kitchen, one of the older ladies pointed into my room and somewhat said, "Oh, and I remember that room. It was cousin so-and-so's room, but her daddy, my Uncle Clarence, would never go in there because he saw a ghost, and he was so shook that he never messed around in there again." I was absolutely floored. This woman volunteered the information. I didn't even think to ask them if they knew about any sort of weird happenings. At this point, even my buddies were stunned to hear this, and now I was happy I told them about it when I did. I asked if the uncle was prone to make up crazy stories, and she said no. By all accounts, he was a fairly typical family member, not any type of person to come up with weird stories for attention or anything like that. So that's about it. If you made it this far, I thank you for reading. I didn't mean to make this so lengthy, but I wanted to be as descriptive as possible, in hopes that the story was enjoyable, and in case it rang any bells for anyone out there. Flashback. Does this mean anything? I always thought I had everything figured out. Wow, that sounds melodramatic. Anyways, I have visions sometimes, very rarely, but they're always in dreams. They're always in black and white. They're always various still shots of the real event. Always something small and meaningless. For example, I had a vision of me walking down the hallway of a building when a person came up to me and started talking. A month later, it all happened exactly like it did in the dream, except not in black and white, and it wasn't still shots. Regardless, recently I had something different. I experienced a lot of flashbacks, but they always have triggers. For example, smelling a certain cologne will give me a flood of memories of an ex-boyfriend, and the flashbacks I have aren't like they're in a movie or video games. It's just a flood of memories, and when I'm remembering them, I can't move or talk. This happened pretty regularly, so I've just learned to live with them. Nothing big about it. But a few days ago, I was at a friend's house. It was noon, bright outside, beginning of August, so it was hot. I opened the door for her to let her dog out, and all of a sudden, it wasn't August. It was like I was transported to a different time, because for a few seconds after I opened the door, it was darker than a black Crayola color, and that there was snow covering every inch of the ground. Something else that was strange, it wasn't cold. It still felt like summer when I opened the door, but then it snapped back to August. It was terrifying. Does anyone know if this could mean anything? Out with the old and in with the new. My father's mother died in 1987 after having repeated heart attacks over a period of about 5 months. Towards the end, she was confined to intensive care and suffered multiple attacks every day, but the doctor just kept bringing her back. She was 68 years old when she died. It was for that reason that my dad swore off hospitals and said that he would never go to a doctor again. He didn't. In 1993, my dad and his second wife bought a home located near a lake in southern Minnesota. It had always been kind of a dream to his to own that home, partly because he was friends with the man who built it, and partly because he grew up near a lake like it. in August of 1996. He was insulating the crawl space underneath the house and contracted some sort of lung ailment. He did not go to the doctor in August. He began coughing. At the time, he and his wife each smoked about a pack of cigarettes a day. He did not go to the doctor in September. He got worse. He did not go to a doctor in October or November. He lost his appetite. He finally went to the doctor on December 17th, but the doctor was on vacation that day. He was told to come back on the 19th. He called work at 7 a.m. on December 18th and retired after working for the same company for over 25 years. I know he knew. He died that night around 7:30 p.m. He was 58 years old. At the time, I was working at a factory job from midnight until 8 a.m. and was going to school during the day. My time to sleep from the afternoon was from 10 or 11 p.m. The night my dad died, I was sound asleep and dreaming that he and I were talking about his future. As I became lucid, I realized he and I were conversing. He said to me that he had an opportunity that he could take advantage of, but would have to die in order for the timing to work out. I made a not-so-nice joke about his second wife and her 4 kids having to find another source of income if he chose to go. I remember that we both laughed at that, and then abruptly my wife came into the bedroom and woke me up. She screamed, "Wake up, your dad had a heart attack, and an ambulance is on the way." At the time, we lived about 2.5 hours away, so it would have been futile to try to rush over there, but I called work and told them I was taking a few days off, and we drove over that night. When we were there, sure enough, he was dead. He was at the funeral home. My brother and sister showed up soon after. We all spent the night at the house. I knew I'd be seeing him in the morning, so I just went to sleep. Around 6 a.m., I thought I woke up and sat up. He was sitting at the end of the bed facing away, but I twisted around so I could see him. All he said was, "Out with the old and in with the new." That is all he had to say, but it said everything. I knew from the smile on his face that he was at peace. He was with his mom and dad, and he was on track. Somehow I also knew that he was coming back into our family by being born again. My wife can't have any more children, and my brother wasn't married, so it was up to my sister. She had 2 and wanted more. From my other stories and posts, you may know that this event is normal everyday stuff to my immediate family. My mom is also supportive since her whole family has various abilities. I tried talking to my dad about going to see grandma before, but he just brushed it away as a memory. I guess he knows better now. After my dad died, I made several journeys up to see him and grandma. Grandpa is usually less energetic. They were always doing something family-oriented. At Thanksgiving, she still makes a big meal even though she says, "You don't get hungry in heaven, but you can eat if you want to." More of a tribute to the memory of being here than anything else. On one visit, I met my grandma and asked where Dad was at. She told me that he had to go to school so that he could be reborn. She said that school would last about 6 months and that he would be born soon after. He was, and his name is Alex. I told my sister all about what was going on with Dad, but somehow she chose to forget, so I left it alone. Her family has a religion, so they don't want another. I try to learn from every experience I have. From this one I learned that memories as well as people live on. Dad could see the future clearly, even though he was still choosing to live or not. To live or die is sometimes our choice, free will. In heaven they view themselves as alive and us as dead. You can come back sometimes. Time in heaven also seems to be somewhat linear, even though he knew the future. Thanksgiving dinner tastes better down here, and if you don't want to experience things down here, it is hard to make up for them up there. Life is sort of like a movie rental store. When you go to the store, you read the back of the box to find out what the movie is about: drama, action, love story, etc. When you have decided, you pay your money and go watch the movie. Likewise, while in heaven you preview what a life could be, then you decide and go live it. Sometimes people believe in fate. I say you previewed it in heaven before you were born. Thanks for reading. The Shadow Man. Hello everyone. I have a couple stories to tell and I'd like some insight into it. I don't really follow the paranormal scenery, but I just remembered these two stories, as me and a group of my friends were discussing odd stuff that happened when we were little. The stories are in chronological order, but my dad told me the first one after I experienced the second one. It will be pretty long. In his early 20s, my father was driving on a countryside road at 11 p.m. or midnight that had little to no lights. There was no one coming and going, so he was the only one in at least a 500 m radius. Suddenly, on the side of the road, there was a man with his arm and thumb up, asking for a passage. My dad slows down and stops right in front of him, then tries to look at the man. He said it was hard to look at him not because it was dark, but because somehow he was physically incapable of doing so. He couldn't make his face out, and was overall a black figure like a shadow, wearing a black suit and a trilby. The man got into the car, thanking my father for stopping by, and asked to be brought to a certain location. Dad accepted it as it was an insignificant deviation from the way home, and they set off. They didn't talk at all during the journey, but my father had a constant feeling of dread, and suddenly everything was colder. When they arrived, the man thanked my father, told him that he would eventually repay the favor, then shook his hand. My father told me it was cold, not like winter-like cold, it was abnormal. The man then went out of the car. They arrived at a cemetery, and he had to go through a small alley on the side. The alley still exists today, and has been a dead end, with no entrances to the cemetery, not even a manhole for sewers. The strange figure waves one last time before entering the alley, and my dad does a U-turn to go back. It took like 10 or 15 seconds, but by the time he passed in front of the alley again, the dark figure was nowhere to be seen. Eventually he went home, slept, and forgot about it altogether, until I told him my story. Now this one takes place a lot of years later, and it's my experience. I was about 7 or 8 years old. It was August 15th, and I had a 42°C fever. I was on the couch, unable to do anything. It was a miracle that I could drink a sip of water once in a while. The only people around were my mother and my grandmother. My father worked away at the time, and my mom's car broke, so he couldn't go anywhere. The doctors weren't answering to the phone calls. I was hallucinating and couldn't keep my thoughts together. Around 3 or 4 times, a bunch of dogs start running around my home, playing and being noisy, only to disappear behind the kitchen walls. Whenever it happened, it gave me a small chuckle. Then people started appearing, walking from one side of the room to the other. I couldn't make out their faces or their body shape, but I knew they were human, but it was like I couldn't focus on them. Then, my fever started to become worse. It was reaching 43°C. Pretty sure my organs were going to fail soon enough. Suddenly amongst those people, I saw a black figure walking. I looked at him. He stopped and said, "Wait a minute." The man then turns to me and comes closer. I can't focus on him either, but he's a shadowy figure wearing a black suit and a trilby. The man kneels and looks at me. I still can't see his face, but I feel his sadness. "You look very sick." An odd feeling of dread starts mounting as I couldn't answer. I was too weak. The man puts his gelid hand on my forehead and says, "It's okay, kid, you'll be fine." At this point, I can feel him smiling. He then stands up, tips his hat to me as goodbye, then returns to the crowd of people and disappears, and I pass out seconds later. I woke up the day after, with normal body temperature and feeling like a lion. I discover that I slept for around 16 hours after I passed out. Tell the story to my dad years later. He becomes pale and tells me the first one. I saw the shadow man one last time one night while I was out, on the other side of the street where I was. This time there was no feeling of dread nor cold in the air. He disappeared as Buzz passed in between us. Still didn't find a chance to thank him, if he's real. After these events, I never suffered from horrific nightmares or sleep paralysis again. Again, sorry for the long writing, but I really like to understand what other people may think on the subject. As far as I am aware, this shadow man is frightening to most people, but I think he actually saved my life. Doppelganger? Spirit mimic? I have a few odd experiences throughout my life, but nothing that I would necessarily label as paranormal, at least not until recently. Full disclosure, I love watching specials about the paranormal. I enjoy reading books about supposedly true hauntings as well as movies about ghosts, demons, etc. Think Insidious, Sinister, The Conjuring. That being the case, I'm very familiar with some of the classic telltale signs of a location that is supposedly haunted. Bad smells, vertigo, cold spots, whispers, etc. But again, taking into account what I know about those things and considering it as a hobby of sorts to read about them, nothing paranormal has ever happened to me. That all changed a couple weeks ago, when I started dating a woman I met while at my job. I had not dated in a very long time, divorced, single dad, pushing 40, a little thick around the waistline, etc. So I was surprised that someone as young and as pretty as she had asked me out. She's 26, but I do look much younger than my age. We hadn't gone on that many dates, maybe 3 or 4 over the course of a few weeks, so even though we communicated a lot via texts, emails, Facebook, etc., we had actually not spent very much time together. So I was taken off guard that she asked me to help her out with a family matter. Her grandmother had been living on her own private property in a camper for 20-some odd years. Just her and a lot of cats. My girlfriend, I'd use that term loosely because again, we were still just getting to know each other, was one of the few members of her family that still made any effort to visit her grandmother and described her as very eccentric, solitary, and somewhat spiteful. Recently, though, her mind seemed to be going. On the rare occasion that anyone went to see her, the consensus was that she had basically gone senile, and nothing she said made sense anymore. So they made the decision to put her into a nursing home, which is where I came in. My girlfriend, who I will call T, needed me to help her clean out her grandmother's camper, save anything that was worth keeping and dump the rest. So we rented a flatbed trailer, and she navigated to the property, which is in Oscar, Texas. She and I are both from Austin. We arrived at around 1 p.m. in the afternoon in mid-August, so it was pretty damn hot. The camper was really small, and had only one window air conditioning unit to cool the entire thing, but there was no longer any electricity to it. So we opened the door, which was not locked, and started going through all her stuff. There was cat poop everywhere, and it smelled really terrible. Plus, there were hundreds of flies. The cats were all gone. It looked like they had been coming and going through the little flaps on either side of the window unit. I started moving stuff and found several decayed dead kittens, tons of roaches, fleas, ticks, spiders. I mean, this place was a complete dive. My girlfriend was really embarrassed and said we would need some cleaning supplies, not realizing it was this bad. Since we arrived there in her vehicle, she drove into town to buy the supplies, and I decided to stay behind and keep working. While I was there alone, I figured I would haul all the big stuff out to the flatbed, which she left behind for me. The minute I started moving furniture to throw it away, the air in the camper got noticeably cooler, at least cool enough for me to notice a difference given how hot it was outside. The fact that there was no electricity for the window unit, plus very little ventilation, made it even more noticeable. I ignored it at first, and thought nothing of it. There was a pond nearby, and I figured maybe a nice little breeze had blown over it towards me. I went about my work, and I began hearing limbs in the trees around the camper creaking and snapping. There was no wind though, so I figured it was probably squirrels, birds, and whatnot. I took a break and went outside for a soda, and I continued to hear snapping and cracking all around me. It's probably not uncommon, but the area was unusually still, for there being so much noise. I went back inside, and felt the immediate drop in temperature. I suppose it could be that when we first got there the sun was shining directly on the camper, so maybe the sun had just shifted, and it was no longer in direct sunlight, maybe. I continued digging through old boxes, and found a medium-sized leather trunk with a rusted padlock on it that looked like it was ready crumbled to dust. I didn't want to throw anything away valuable, so I busted the lock off with my heel of my boots and looked inside the trunk. what I found was the weirdest assortment of stuff I'd ever laid eyes on. Various rocks, crystals, candles, lots of little bottles with God knows what's in them, old strings, strips of leather. And then I found a small skeleton of some kind of animal. Probably a cat. But it had stuff written on the actual bones. At this point I paused and began to feel extremely uncomfortable. It was like the air got heavier, the sounds of insects outside had stopped, and I could feel a pressure against my eardrums. The hairs on my arms and neck stood on end. It became harder to breathe, and I felt something that was almost like an electric charge in my stomach. I know enough about this type of thing from reading about the paranormal that I could guess I was not welcome there. So, I left the camper and waited outside for T to come back while I tried to wrap my head around what had just happened. She was gone for what seemed like a really, really long time, but finally came back. And she was like, "Oh, I thought you would have all cleaned out by now." Obviously, she had stalled, hoping I would do the lion's share of the work, but I digress. Anyways, I told her about what happened, and she was like, okay. Sounds like the heat got to you. Are you feeling lightheaded?" Well, yeah, but for a completely different reason than heat exhaustion. I asked her if she thought what I described was strange, and she seemed amused that I had gone scared but didn't answer. I asked why someone would write on an animal skeleton, but she blew it off, attributing it to her grandmother's diminishing mental state. Like I said before, she was gone for a while, and we didn't have a lot of daylight left. Now that we were on a time crunch, she angrily began throwing away anything and everything on the flatbed, no longer caring about looking through stuff to see if there was anything we should keep. And really, there wasn't anything worth salvaging. It was all rotten. After a few hours, we did manage to get it cleared out, but it became clear that cleaning this thing was not going to serve much of a purpose. It was barely standing as it was. I recommended that she should get someone to just haul the whole thing away and leave whatever was still in there, which is probably what we should have done in the first place. She wanted to take one last look around the camper and make sure she didn't miss anything. Here is where things got really weird. I was securing the stuff we decided to keep on the trailer when I heard her ask, "What are you doing?" Not looking up, I said I was making sure the stuff wasn't going to fall out. She then turned to look at me, her eyes as wide as I had ever seen them, looked back out the window she had been at, screamed and bolted out the camper. And I was like, What is it?" She told me that she swore she had seen me walking on the opposite side of the camper. Not just someone that looked like me, but me. I told her to wait there, and I walked around the corner of the camper. I can't really be sure, but for a brief second or two, I think I saw the outline of a person before it disappeared. According to T, this man looked exactly like me, so she thought it was me. She said it even turned and smiled at her, which is when she asked what I was doing. When I answered from out by the car, she freaked out. We both agreed that at that point, there was definitely something off about the place. Not just the camper, but the actual property. I told her I didn't know what her grandmother was into, or what she did all alone out there for 20 years, but it didn't feel like a good thing. We left at around 8 p.m., just as it started to get dark, and never went back. That isn't quite the end, though. Last week, about a month after all this happened, T asked me if I would go with her to visit her grandma in the nursing home since, again, no one else really ever went to see her. I said sure, and we drove to a nearby city called Temple, where the nursing home was located. We got there, signed in, and they asked us to wait while they went to get her. I was in the lobby checking email on my iPhone, while T and her grandma visited together in the common area. T poked her head around the corner and asked me to come back with her so I could meet her grandma. On our way to her room, T said her grandma looked great and seemed to be in really good health. She was lucid, not babbling, and generally happy. But the minute she laid eyes on me, she flipped out and started screaming, "Why are you here? What do you want with me? Why did you follow me?" The nurses had to restrain her, and they asked me to wait back in the lobby because me being there was upsetting her. I have no idea what to make of this. First, he sees someone that looks like me. Then her grandma sees me and thinks I'm following her? As if we had met before, even though I'd never seen her before in my life. I have no explanation for any of this, but it all seems too coincidental to brush off, given what I felt on that property, the weird occult stuff I found there. T seeing someone that looked like me, plus the way her grandma reacted to seeing me is just bizarre. Anyways, that's my story. I was not so much scared by any of this as I was fascinated. On a side note, T and I agreed a few days ago that dating each other just didn't have that spark we were looking for, but we remain good friends. A mysterious blob in the woods. I'm quite new to writing stuff on here, so excuse me if I do things wrong. Back in late August one afternoon, my boyfriend and I were taking a stroll in the woods in his grandparents' backyard, and we got somewhat far in them, and found a tree that was on the ground. It had fallen or someone broke it, I don't really know. We had to pass over it and get to a large field, which we wanted to get to. But I saw a bunch of spiderwebs on the leaves of the trees surrounding us at the time, so I decided that we should nope out of there. But before we left, we saw some kind of white bulb hanging from the tree that was on the ground. My boyfriend thought that maybe it was a water balloon that kids had placed or something. It looked like it had a rubbery texture, so curious, he poked it and it fell off. Then he decided to step on it, and because he thought it was hollow, and to our surprise, there was some disgusting cream-colored liquid, gooey stuff coming out of it. We freaked out, so we just left the woods and tried to find information about those things all over in the internet and found nothing. It's been bothering us for months, and we really have no idea what it is. We've jokingly said that it was some alien type of thing, but it seems like the most likely explanation so far, since we've been digging and digging for information for months now and keeps finding nothing. Another weird thing about those woods were the fact that there were holes everywhere. Now that I think of it, the forest was very strange and eerie. I might be haunted. So, I didn't really know where to go to talk about this, but there have been quite a few strange things happening to me for the past few months. I've always believed in ghosts, and my family started experiencing things a few years ago. Just a few things here and there. That's another story. What I want to talk about has been happening since about August. Sometimes I hear people saying my name, and it's happened in more than one location. The first few times it happened, I just thought someone said my name or someone else had the same name as me. But it's always been the same voice, and every time it happened, no one was speaking to me. Another thing that happened was in my dorm's bathroom. I was using the restroom, and I was completely alone, but the door of the stall right next to me creaked open. That's the only time. I've been genuinely scared by all of this. The biggest thing that happens involves streetlights. It's getting to the point where almost every day, or at least every 2 days, streetlights go out when I go by them. Last night was basically the last straw. It's the reason why I'm writing this. I was going to visit my girlfriend, and earlier that night 2 streetlights had gone out. I turned down my music, and asked whoever it was if they were the one doing this. I asked them to turn off a streetlight to show me that they were there, and that they could hear me down the street. A light goes out. Of course, I kind of freaked out and asked them to do it again, but the light came back on. When I was waiting for my girlfriend in the parking lot, another streetlight went out. I want to make it clear that I'm not afraid. I'm actually kind of want to contact whatever it is. I'm not sure what the point of posting this is, but I wanted to get other people's inputs on the situation. I'm about to go home for winter break. Afterwards, I'm going to be seeing a psychic with some family. I'll give an update if anything comes up in the reading. My time in my former 100-year-old home. Now, it's been a while since I lived in the house that this story is about, but the unexplained experiences I had during that time I lived there are the most intense I think I'll ever have. I remember the day we first walked into this historic home. I was a young teen and was nursing a springtime cold. We had been looking for a new home for some time, so my brother and I were not overjoyed to be house hunting again. This particular home stuck out due to the fact that it was on the same street that my parents' first home was located. My adult sister, who lived with them at the time, still claims that my parents' old house was haunted but won't elaborate. Our future home was a grayish blue with large fir trees in the front yard, built in craftsman-style architecture, as was common in the neighborhood. It had a large front porch, probably built specifically for a tuberculosis patient, due to this house being built during a time where tuberculosis was rampant and people thought sleeping outside would cure the ailment. At the time, I didn't know that, and pictured sitting on it and reading books in the afternoon during the summertime. Inside the house, it was dark and damp. It had been empty for a while. The dark wood accents created a heavy atmosphere, and many of the doorknobs were original and didn't turn anymore. The first feeling I got there was a fierce loneliness. The layout itself was strange. 2 bedrooms flanked a ragged bathroom, the only entrance to it being through one of the bedrooms. The upstairs bedroom was huge and had numerous strange crawl spaces that had enough space in them to be entire rooms themselves. One of them even had dirty orange shag carpet at its entrance, and it was a tiny door in a small closet that would be my mom's. I instantly fell in love. I was crazy for creepy old houses, so immediately set to convince my parents this was the best choice. We moved in during the early summer. I was really enjoyed living there at first. I made friends in the neighborhood and had a really amazing summer. When the fall started cooling the weather, I began to get nervous being alone in my new home. One night, I was in the kitchen with my mother facing the living room, which was dark and had a large window facing the street. Often cars drove by, lighting up the living room with their headlights. My mom was chopping vegetables and joking with me and my brother as I raised my eyes, not for the first time, to the living room as a car drove by. I instantly froze as I saw a large dark silhouette of a man in front of the window. My blood ran cold as I instantly jumped to the conclusion that someone had broken into our home. My mom looked up at me to see why I wasn't answering her and raised her knife as she saw the expression on my face. We searched the entire house and no one was there. My brother even checked outside and no one was around, especially since there is only one way to get away and it's the street. Our neighbors had large fences. After that, I was on edge for maybe a day or two before forgetting about it and continuing to work on my homeschooling program. I was trying to graduate early, so my attention was pretty focused on schooling. When I was home alone, which was a very common occurrence since my mom worked, I often heard someone walking around upstairs, which was my mom's room. I would go check to see if it was my cats or my dog, but no one was up there. Eventually, I just stopped checking. Then one evening, after a long day of schoolwork, I sat down to watch TV in the living room. The stairs to my mom's room had an old door that was shut since she was asleep. The door was heavy and latched very securely, since it was difficult to open in the first place. As I sat, enjoying a rerun on SNL, the doorknob turned and the door slowly swung open. I frowned and paused the show. I called out my kitten's name since my other cat was in my lap. I got up to see if she got stuck upstairs. I looked up the dark stairs and called out to my kitten. I heard something scuffling on the stairs but couldn't see since turning on the light would wake up my mom. I sighed and pushed the door closed, convinced it was nothing since my kitten's always meowed when she heard me calling. I walked into my room, which was right next to the door to the stairs, and began searching for my cell phone. I turned to leave and watched again as the door swung open slowly. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck raise and the air seemed electric. I immediately closed it and began searching for my kin, who I found balled up in my brother's bed next to our dog. I felt a chill and went to bed shortly afterwards. After that, the door was to open up slowly and purposefully in front of us often. We tried to debunk it by walking up and down the whole house and opening and closing all the doors. Thusly, if the door popped open due to changing pressure, nothing. It latched tightly no matter what. Later on Christmas morning, I went to go wake up my brother so we could take a peek at our presents. He had been known to sleepwalk and be very hard to wake up. So I shook him lightly, and he popped into a sitting position staring at me. "There's someone in my closet." I froze. His eyes were wide open as he told me this. I looked back at his closet, which was half closed. "He's gonna kill us. He's hiding in there waiting." I was hoarse with fear and demanded he go to check it out. My brother suddenly woke up and then checked out the closet. Although he didn't know why I made him do it. He didn't remember me telling him anything. That was the first and last time he talked in his sleep. During all this time, the footsteps never stopped, and the front door sometimes would be wide open in the mornings when we were sure we had locked it the night before. I also started to hear voices coming from the vent in my room, which connected directly to the unfinished stone and dirt floor basement. The woman across the street told me that the upstairs was large due to a family in the 1920s having many children who would sleep in dorm-like conditions up there with no heat. That was the only time she spoke to me, even though I tried to say hi to her many times before and after she said that. I also watched the strings on the blinds in the bathroom start to swing wildly, after being completely still next to a closed window on a hot, still day in August. I also thought I saw someone walk past our breakfast nook windows when I was outside doing yard work, and once we were eating dinner on the patio. Both times I checked to see if someone was there. There never was. The house was always empty. All this came to an end when I woke up one morning during the summertime. My blinds were closed, but my window was open since there was no air conditioning. Light flooded in from the place where the window pane swung open. I woke up facing my desk I used for schooling, and my office chair. In the office chair was a black figure with a white face and big black eyes. I screamed and rolled off the other side of my bed. When I looked back, the room was empty. The figure looked vaguely like No-Face from the movie Spirited Away. After that, I demanded that whatever was in the house leave me and my family alone, because it wasn't something I could handle anymore. We never had another experience in the 6 months we lived in the house after I did that.